Hello and welcome. My name is Jack Tips, and I've been involved with systemic formulas since I first met Doc Wheelwright. So I want to talk a little bit today about one of my great mentors of natural health, Doc Wheelwright, and looking at his legacy as it's continued for the last 30 years or more. And so we'll be talking a little bit about Doc and some of his ideas, some of his research, and how that initial spark has gone through now more than 2 generations, staying true to the original founding of the principles of Doc Wheelwright, yet adapting itself and evolving right into the cellular healing that's necessary for the 21st century. So I think to get started on this, we want to be looking at something that's a healing legacy, and this is where Doc Wheelwright came into the picture. As a young natural health clinician, I'd opened up a clinical practice, and I'm always on the search for formulas that would give an extra dimension to helping people's body heal themselves. And this is exactly what I learned from Doc Wheelwright, that he would say that when he constructed an herb formula, he was looking for it to be a directive that would help the body heal itself. Now, some of the things that Doc Wheelwright brought forth for us was entirely a new way of looking at herbology. And so we often say that before Doc Wheelwright, there was Chinese medicine with at least a 5,000-year history of certain principles about how to treat the body, how to mix herbs together, patent formulas that were tried and true over the centuries, and specialized techniques for how to take the herbs and maybe change them from time to time and have the formulas stay alive throughout a person's sojourn of remedial effort. And so from this, we have the Chinese legacy, and of course at the same time we have a Native American legacy, and we have a European and an African legacy. But herbology had reached a certain pinnacle of usage and effectiveness, and then, you know, let's say certainly around the 1900s, then there started to become other avenues being investigated. And this is where we find the beginnings of modern medicine coming along with modern pharmacology, and that people started turning away from the herbs and getting more of the patent formulas that were coming from the pharmaceutical industry, and then the training and analysis of medicine. So we would say in our own lifetime that herbology has taken perhaps a second place role to the newer science of modern medicine. And yet from the herbs come a majority of modern medicines. And this is why so much of the modern pharmacology has been in the jungles around the world. And that's exactly where Doc Wheelwright went for a lot of his knowledge, is he would seek out the barefoot doctors and learn what were they doing with the plants and how to mix them. So herbology, for the most part in American herbology, as people in the 1960s, the 1970s, they started getting acquainted with single herbs. They would take herb courses or say, I'm a master herbalist. I certainly went through those courses where you learn things about the individual herbs. One of the dimensions that Doc Wheelwright brought forth was the true power of herbs was in how to combine them. And so Doc Wheelwright becomes not necessarily the father of combinetic herbology, because certainly Chinese medicine had been doing that, but he did enter into bringing forth a new dimension in herbal healing and in herbology because of his research, which I get to share with you now. So the thing that interested Doc Wheelwright, I think, the very most, first of all, let's understand that he was very well versed in the single herbs and the traditional herbology of things like Back to Eden from Jethro Kloss, Culpepper's Herbal Encyclopedia, and that body of knowledge. And in Doc Wheelwright's early work, he worked with the Dominion Herbal College in Vancouver and had actually compiled one of their main textbooks on herbology, and it was called Master Herbology. So by the time Doc Wheelwright started his herbal research and his gallivanting all over the planet Earth to find the special herbs that would add a new dimension to herbology and to meet with the barefoot doctors, he had a vast amount of knowledge on herbs, nutrition, amino acids, vitamins, minerals, and that would sort of be, we would say, his foundation. The thing that captured Doc Wheelwright's imagination and focused his research was the concept of bioenergy. Now, today in the 21st century, when we think of bioenergy, we think of biofuel, that we're going to use plant material such as corn and make ethanol from it and put it in the gas tank or something like that, or we're looking at life-based fuels. But that's not the definition of bioenergy that we use in the natural health sciences. In Chinese medicine, bioenergy would be the meridians. We know of the yin and yang influences with the body and how the meridians have an electron flow and a flow of energy or etheric energy that supports the body. And that brings us to one of the key foundational premises in Chinese medicine, that the cause of all disease is congestion and the cure for all disease is circulation. So taking that affirmation, Doc Wheelwright started looking at, well, what provides the bioenergetic circulation? What unlocks the blockages? And so bioenergy, according to Doc Wheelwright, was the resonant life force that's in all living things, even in very primitive life forms such as minerals. We know that minerals can keep growing and keep adding to themselves. So there's actually movement and development with the mineral kingdom, but more importantly, the plants have the uptake and use of minerals, and then the plants become organized life forms that have specific resonance patterns that develop according to sacred geometry, or that develop according to archetypal patterns. And so if we look at one of the early sciences that Doc Wheelwright had studied and translated some of the original documents from Dr. Samuel Hahnemann from the late 18th century, he had looked at and already come to grips with the concept that there's a system of medicine and healing called homeopathy, and that is treating like with likes. That the plants have like suffering, and therefore a plant could be used to make in its essence available, and that if that matched up with a person's ailments, then the homeopathic physician would know to apply that particular remedy. Doc also had looked quite a bit in his scientific studies, because Doc held the Edison Award. He had done work with spider venoms, helping to have antidotes, that he was an explosives chemist in World War II. He held patents for the camera. He worked for Eastman Kodak. And he also worked with one of, he considered his all-time great mentor, Dr. Royal Lee. And so where Doc was coming from with this concept was that the plants have bioenergy, and he wanted to find ways of combining them and enhancing the bioenergy so that a plant or herbal vitamin mineral combinations could impart a specific resonance pattern to the body that the body's innate vitality could use to heal. So what we've outlined now is that there's a system of healing, homeopathy, and that would be like cures like. Doc was very familiar with allopathy, which is the treating of opposites, of which there's a lot of elements of that in Chinese medicine, that if a person has a fever, they take cooling herbs. If a person has diarrhea, they take herbs that would diminish diarrhea. And that same is practiced mostly now in modern allopathic medicine, where drugs are used to suppress symptoms, where in homeopathy, it allows the body to have the symptom and literally work through it and heal itself. And then Doc found a position in the middle that guided his herbology. So we often would look at that and call it neutral ability, that Doc wanted to match the resonance of plants that he was measuring, and I'll soon tell you how. But Doc was measuring with his equipment the resonance or the bioforce or the life force of plants and combining them and looking at new resonances until a lot of times he would try to get them to match the frequency of a human tissue. In other words, the kidneys would resonate to a certain frequency. Doc cataloged that frequency, and then he would work with the herbs and the vitamins and the minerals, working that substance until he had the same resonance. And this is where he established the law of herbal synergism, that combined herbs actually give the body more than the sum total of the individual parts. That you could take 5 independent herbs and only get a certain amount of response, but if they were properly combined, that then a person would be able to have the overtone energy, and that energy could resonate with that person's vital force and actually harness the body to take care of business. In other words, to not have that symptom expression. Now, some of these basic thoughts are going to go through the generations after Doc Wheelwright, right on into the present moment. And we'll talk in just a minute about how that happens. But by way of introduction, this is giving you a little bit of an idea about Doc Wheelwright's bioenergetic research and the fact that he was first and foremost a chemist and a biochemist and a researcher and a globe-trotting traveler and a seeker of knowledge. And within the framework of his life, he had an experience that caused him to fully embrace the earlier traditions of herbology and bring them forward toward the end of the 20th century, and then leave a legacy that has continued on with his son and his grandson and granddaughter, that this legacy of Doc Wheelwright continues as the formulations and the nutrition work enters into the realm of cellular healing, the performance of the cellular organelles and genetic transcription, the science of epigenetics, and what's called herbolomic influences, meaning that certain herbs now have been scientifically researched to show that they can impact the epigenetic switches, how RNA is transcribing DNA to tell the cells how to live in their most optimal health. Now, this whole thing comes back to what Doc Wheelwright simply called the herbs are God's medicines. And he founded that principle on the fact that the herbs have similar suffering, that the herbs grow in nature. They have to find the terrain. They have to have the bacteria and the fungal forms convert the earth nutrients and those minerals into the plant. The same thing with the human being. Our gut microbiome converts our foods and creates nascent vitamins, and they're an intermediary between our diet and our cellular health. And so the same principle holds true. The similar suffering of herbs means that they're fighting in a competitive environment. There's animals that want to eat them. There's insects that want to eat them. There's a sun that wants to burn them. There's dry seasons, wet seasons. There's freezing rains and fierce winds and all the things that nature has to do to protect itself and follow its number one credo: adapt to survive. The second part of that credo is to express the most optimal health possible. So Doc Wheelwright taught us back in the late to mid 80s and on into the earliest part of the 1990s, that the herbs, where he would say they're God's medicines, he was simply referring to that the herbs grow up with similar patterns, with this bioenergy resonance that directly relates to the challenges of being a human being, that we have to adapt and survive as well. So when he looked at the full gestalt of life on earth, He said the plants become the medicines for the human being. And we have to admit this tradition has continued with all the allopathic drugs having most of their foundations in herbal medicine, in the molecules of a plant, and then they're being able to develop them out of usually coal tar and petrochemicals into an analog or one molecule specifically. Doc always maintained, let's use the whole herb. That herb is grown with the buffers, with full characteristics. So this entered a lot into nutritional studies with, let's say, just vitamin C. That a synthetic vitamin C, ascorbic acid, did not have with it all the synergist of the bioflavonoids and even unknown properties that if you got it straight from a plant. So Doc held the plant kingdom to be the sacrosanct foods and medicines for a human being. One of Doc's great achievements and loves was he was one of the early forerunners of what's called today quantum physics or quantum mechanics, that he was early on realizing that sometimes even microdoses could epigenetically change the way the body experiences life and elicit the changes in the body so that it could better regulate itself. So from Doc Wheelwright, we get the Provita diet, where he spent 30 years researching the care and feeding of the human body. He gave us a number of quantum physics principles about bioenergy and its ability to impact the body for healing. Doc was an early forerunner of a lot of the principles that have been embodied in natural health over the last 30 to 50 years. Now, one time I talked with Doc and I wanted to know what were his great loves and his interests. And he said, well, number one, that he was just madly in love with the Brazilian herbs. And he often traveled to Brazil and went into the rainforest because he felt that that was one of the areas that reseeded the entire earth after the Ice Age. So he felt that the Brazilian herbs were, rainforest herbs, we'll say, were the foundational plants. And he often returned to the rainforest to find the parents of many of the plants that had proliferated and adapted into other climates and into other hemispheres. Another thing that he enjoyed citing was Nikola Tesla and some of Tesla's latter research. He enjoyed Walter Russell, particularly as far as quantum physics and nuclear physics. He had the highest respect, and he worked hand in hand with Dr. Royal Lee for a short period of time. And he felt that Dr. Royal Lee was the greatest and guiding genius of the 20th century. Doc always put himself in a second position to Royal Lee. But Doc felt that in his life, he was commissioned by Royal Lee to bring forth the herbs. Dr. Lee said that he would focus on vitamins and foods as nutrition, but that Doc should take the concepts of herbology, of which Dr. Lee did not know anything about, and that he said to Doc, go forth, seek your destiny, like the three little pigs, go forth and seek your destiny with the herbs. That drove Doc straight to the Native Americans. Now, in his lifetime, Doc became a medicine man in 2 Native American tribes. And so he would often quote from some of the Blackfoot tradition and the Nepari or Nez Perce traditions of Native Americans. And he would live with the Native Americans and study their herbology in a great deal, because that's where we get American or North American herbology, of course, is coming through the Native Americans. That was their primary focus as far as their healing herbs and healing medicines. Doc also, in becoming a medicine man, was trained and practiced in many of the Native American healing techniques. Doc also corresponded with the Kurlians in Russia, The Curlians had developed a method to photograph bioenergy. And while later science pulled away from that, because you've seen Curlian photography, you see someone's hand and it shows the corona of energy coming off of the person, how vital is their aura, their vital force. The issue is that went away in a vacuum, and it seemed to be influenced by maybe barometric pressures and humidity in the air. So science didn't go too far with the fact that bioenergy could be photographed, but that still doesn't refute the basic fundamental that a person and that type of photography can actually film the corona discharge of energy emanating from a human being. So that was one of the first scientific angles that said, there is something to this Chinese medicine that talks about bioenergy and talks about meridians. And so now there was another science that brought this out, that sure enough, around the body would be this energy field, a magnetic field, because all life forms are generating ATP energy. The mitochondria are creating, and a living system has an immanence. And it's even been speculated some of this bioenergetic force field around a human being actually has a measurable quantity that after a person dies, they weigh a fraction of an ounce less than when they're alive, and even without discharge of water, that something is gone, something intangible is gone. That is the animating life force. Doc Wheelwright often went to the Philippines, and he studied with the Filipino healers there. He went to the Brazilian rainforest, and I just can't even imagine how he got the information that he was able to give, because people don't give away things for free. And so Doc would have to go in and maybe treat someone in the village with what he knew about herbology, or share his knowledge first. And then when there was not, let's say, jealousy feelings, and there was some trust and respect, he would learn from the barefoot doctors. And he actually traveled the world over many times, specializing in answers for parasitic infections such as worms and even microscopic parasites. And he traveled the world for digestive insights and liver insights predominantly. So Doc was an accumulator of massive amounts of data and energy. And so it was in 1984 that I met Doc Wheelwright after 10 years of searching. I had found in my studies of herbology and natural healing and naturopathy that there was this guy out there, Alexander Stewart Wheelwright, aka Doc Wheelwright, that had developed some amazing formulas and was teaching natural healing techniques and methods, and a strange, rare science of looking at the red lines in the whites of the eyes. Doc called this sclerology. He's the founder of sclerology. And that he had studied, he picked this up from the Native Americans. He found roots back into Chinese medicine, that the natural doctor would often look in the eye and the pattern of the red lines as being reflective of stresses in the body, not to be confused with the iridology type work. Doc was looking at the reflex of the lines and their movement in the eyes. And so he developed this system and taught this often. Well, I was very interested in this, and I'd actually learned about it while working with another mentor whose name was Dr. Bernard Jensen. And out there at his Hidden Valley Health Ranch in Escondido, California, where I had odd job work in order to maintain my ability to earn my keep and learn from the great naturopath, Dr. Jensen. Doc was a man that literally could polarize a room. And here he is, he's humbly dressed. I called him, he wears lumberjack shirts. He'd wear a plaid shirt and some baggy Docker kind of pants, usually wrinkled. And he would walk into the room and everybody would know it. There was just a glow about the man. And I would say 98% of the room would just almost instantly fall in love with him. And 2%, they probably started to hate his guts and didn't even know why. That's polarization. But he had that charisma, but most of all, he was not this big, bustling ego of blather and loudness. He was humble, he was quiet. But when he looked at someone, he fully engaged them, and they knew in that moment that they had his full attention. And Doc would come and lecture, and he would see 32 people in a day sometimes. And then that evening lecture and lecture for hours. After hearing the same stories over and over and over again, as people would say, well, Doc, tell us about your diet for the health and healing and maintenance of the human being according to the body, not to some theory, you know. And Doc would say, well, the teeth are made a certain way, and that tells us what we should eat. And the digestive tract, the length of it, tells us what we should eat. The nutrients our cells need tells us what we should eat. So they would beg Doc to do that. Well, after I heard it over and over again, I decided to get with Doc and write the book, The Pro-Vita Plan for Optimal Nutrition, just so we could give it out to people who came to his lectures, and that forced him to talk about other things. And so then the Healing Triad, Your Liver, Your Lifeline was born, and then we laid that aside and we kept pushing Doc, and Timothy Coos did the same thing. We kept pushing Doc to give us more, to give us more. We were hungry for the knowledge that he would give. To fill this out a little bit, Doc was well versed in more of the arcane practice of radionics and understood energy healing. And it was such an important lesson to me that there's more in our cosmology than our brains can encompass. There's more to healing than interpreting a blood test. There's more to healing than doing an adjustment or taking measurements. And there's always this plus element to life. And that was such an important lesson for me. And it was probably, I think, the first time I met Doc, just being totally blown away with that. Dr. Timothy Coos had similar experiences when Doc would go to California to work with Timothy there. And we would compare notes. And from things like that come this humble beginning. Both Timothy and I would travel with Doc and study with him, attend his lectures, take copious notes, and we started collecting the facts that Doc looked at life, organizing energy according to sacred geometry, that all life has resonant patterns. And so now a little bit about Doc in the laboratory. As a 12-year-old child, Doc Wheelwright had been awarded the Edison Award for the sophistication of his own chemistry lab in his basement. And he was given an Edison Award at the age of 12. So we have to understand the man was a genius, except that in just living out the left side of his brain, he dedicated a large part of his life to developing the right side of his brain. And so now the legacy will continue, and Doc's final work in perfecting his formulas, which his legacy was that to systemic formulas that was founded by his son, Stu Wheelwright, created the structure, created the matrix for disseminating Doc's work and Doc's formulas. Now, Doc had his laboratory and an instrument that he called the biosynthesizer, and basically it was a beaker of triple distilled water. It had electrodes in it, and that it went to an oscilloscope, and Doc would put substances in the water and measure the surface tension changes. And he would catalog different numeric formulas or numeric values on these ranges and difference of surface tension. So he would know what the kidneys resonated. If you take desiccated kidney, and he would do that with bovine and human, and he would take measurements, And then he could start grinding and mixing herbs and vitamins and minerals and put a pinch of that in the distilled water and get the sine wave and the measurements from the sine wave to equal kidney. And of course, he's using kidney herbs that come right out of Culpeper's and the Native American studies and the Brazilian studies. He would take all the kidney herbs from around the world and start looking, mixing and matching, cataloging, measuring, and then he came up with his formulas. He found over time, as he learned more and found new herbs and new ingredients, and there's new research coming out of science, he would go back and he would rework the formulas and keep trying to enhance them, to tighten them up. He would say that it was like putting wedges to make a soccer ball, and that he might have 15 of them when he needed 24. And so he had a good formula, but he said it didn't stop him from constant and never-ending improvement. And so Doc had his equipment and cataloged herbs and tissues and vitamins and minerals, and that's where he noticed a huge difference between the synthetic vitamins, which is all he had to work with. It's only in the new legacy under Dr. Shane Morris has the manufacturing of the systemic formulas been able to start to embrace true whole complex plant vitamins. And so again, times must change. The healing directives must keep up with the greater challenges of the 21st century. Now that we understand a little bit about this amazing man, let's look at how he formulated, or some of his principles of formulation, because there's no one that approaches herbal formulas or nutritional formulas quite the way that Doc Wheelwright did when he looked at the key factors that were needed in order to base a formula on bioenergy. And so the first thing Doc noticed in his research is that when we talk about how he used the oscilloscope and he called the biosynthesizer, that he would take a formula, maybe something he bought at the health food store or something that he ordered, and he would put it into the water, and then when he ran his calculations, he would call it's an incomplete formula. It doesn't have the resonance. He says it's got some herbs, maybe it has herbs and vitamins, but it's not working. And so if we think of Doc trying to make a circle like this pie chart, that he would find that there's just gaps. And so energy couldn't spin. You couldn't get that extra resonance. Sometimes Doc would maybe try to teach us that it was an electron shell, but he says you're not getting the bioenergetics. And so a formula would be labeled as incomplete. Other times he would put it in there and there might be some energy, but it wouldn't relate to anything with the body. And he would call that an imbalanced formula. So when you look at this chart, Doc would summarize this as being, this is an imbalanced formula. That it's got too much of something, not enough of something else, and when it's all put together, it's just not working. And we can certainly understand that from a perspective of herbology when we look at some of the patent formulas from ancient Chinese medicine, that you can't put a double dose of something in there and have it work quite right. These formulas in Chinese medicine were developed over thousands of years, probably on hundreds of thousands and millions of people, and got put together in such a way that they knew time and again that they could deliver the work. So we can see that a formula can be imbalanced, it can be incomplete, and that you don't get the wheel turning. And so the wheelwright, Doc, was really looking at how to get this additional energy, this free flow of energy that could be imparted to the body. And so he got the resonance and would say that often the tissues of the body, while they're all different, in other words, a liver vibrates or resonates differently than the brain, but within the confines of the human life of that individual, it was like a symphony of many different instruments. And they all had to be in the same key, or they all had to be playing on the same music. And so that's where he started his work and development. And so we found here in this next pie chart some of the varied ingredients that Doc would go to. Or he would have herb combinations to serve as buffers, maybe against an aggravating factor in an herb. And he would have enhancers. And he would be working with triads of amino acids and vitamins and cellular identity factors, where he actually would bring in RNA, DNA patterns from tissue and work with that as a foundational. Doc would often say that fills the gaps between all these herbs and components, meaning it would be more like the key of the formula. And so Doc was reluctant to share, but over time we got more and more information about how he formulated. So this is how he would work, and always be, you could say it was trial and error, that it was mixing and matching until he got the energy right. And then he would release that formula. And then his son Stuart, who had set up the structure of systemic formulas, would have that and add it to the repertory. And so let's just move on with time. Doc passed away in 1990. And so he left us this legacy, and he left it broken out with several people. And most of us have tried to get that information back in to his son and to Systemic, and share that information with the next generation of practitioners who are called to be natural health healers, not necessarily just practitioners. And so the next phase of Systemic was Stu Wheelwright, the son, building the building, building the warehouse, acquiring the raw materials, putting production, maintaining. I'll tell you one thing about Stu Jr., he is a bulldog on holding to the integrity of Doc's formulas, and he was not going to let things change the work and the resonance that Doc brought into those formulas. One of the things that Doc was doing is when he got his formulas to the right vibratory rate, he said they would actually could absorb energy and actually strengthen themselves synergistically, before the person would take them. And so we had this lore and legend of these incredible formulas that very quickly made their way into particularly the chiropractic practice, because so many chiropractors were doing kinesiology. And so they're testing the energy of these substances on an individual person through muscle strength and weakness. And they gravitated to the systemic work greatly because they just tested so well. People that did electroacupuncture and resonance-based work gravitated to these formulas because they were so strong and worked so well. So many of the natural health doctors, including medical doctors that were becoming, back in those days, it was called complementary medicine. Today it's called functional medicine. Chiropractors, medical doctors, naturopaths, acupuncturists seemed to be the main devotees of what Doc had brought out. And maybe they didn't care so much about the story and his work and his world travels and Native American studies. They would simply look at the formula, check it on a person, and see the results that Doc's theories could bring for someone. And so as time went on, then Systemic was indeed very blessed to have Stu's daughter, Nicole, and Stu's is an uncle to Dr. Shane Morris. Now, Dr. Shane Morris is a biochemist. He taught at universities, and he's also a cellular biologist. And so now we have the hard science, prove it to me person, because science is science and chemistry is chemistry. And Shane walks into this legacy of bioenergy and resonance with the body, and it didn't take Shane long at all to embrace these principles, again, seeing firsthand how things can come together. The work that Shane has done has been not only maintaining impeccably the integrity of Doc's formulas, but actually seeking out and procurement of even better raw materials, enhancing raw materials. And then Shane has taken this legacy into the world of herbolomic cellular healing. Or again, herbolomic means that the botanicals chosen have scientific research studies that show they impact the epigenetic expression of the cells in relationship to why the formula is being made. And so in Shane's work, he's developed a proprietary form of chromium that can work with the cellular glucose mechanisms. He's been able to assemble the fatty acids that work with the cell membrane integrity. He's been able to assemble both the botanicals and the nutrients that support mitochondrial biogenesis, mitochondrial production of ATP energy. Because all healing, as Doc would tell us, you have to have energy to heal. Well, that energy is one, adenosine triphosphate, ATP, that Shane was building in the ability to the formulas. The second energy is the bioenergy resonance that comes when you selectively and carefully combine the ingredients into an exquisite resonance that is very, very similar to the healthy tissue that the body needs to improve in order to have the best health that it can. And so here's the legacy from Doc to the son, Stu Jr., to Stu's daughter, Nicole Sugihara, who works at the company in education and training, and Dr. Shane Morris, who's a sort of a general manager, chief formulator, and designer of his grandpa's legacy, taking those principles but bringing it in to the 21st century. In summary, Doc Wheelwright is a watershed moment in the 4,000 or 5,000 year timeline of recorded herbal tradition. This is because of his bioenergetic work and his development of new principles that are applied directly to herbology. So while the legacy continues, what is that legacy specifically? It was that the herbs can work together better than the individual parts. Now, we cited this as the law of synergy, that combinations of herbs complement each other the same way a good marriage that complements each partner and makes two become a force of three or something, that there's magic in the combination. Same thing with Doc and his herbology. He was always looking at the self-enhancing aspect that only living nutrients can participate in. So he gave us the law of herbal synergism. He gave us another law, herbal ionization, and Doc was very much interested in the anabolic, catabolic, and even what's called polyionic or adaptogenic aspects of herbs. Obviously, if you're looking to build a system in the body using anabolic herbs, the builders of cellular metabolism, those would be the ones to gravitate and not accidentally mix catabolic herbs with anabolic and then have them kind of come to cross purposes. That was the brilliance that Doc was able to bring, and he actually set up the laws for herbalists to understand these features about the herbs. He tuned his formulas based on the numeric values and the resonance that he was able to catalog. He tuned these formulas to specific tissues or to specific systems of the body. And so this, he felt, would give an extra edge doing some of the work for the body, that there was actually a resonant presence about his formulations that would communicate that bioenergy to the body, enliven the body with a directive to seek its most optimal, natural, happy, healthy, innate function of the tissue and the cellular metabolic processes. We also discussed that Doc had this concept of neutral or neutrality in his work, that he was neither allopathic, trying to suppress any function of the body with plants, nor was he looking more at the homeopathic aspect of eliciting from the body a specific reaction. He brought him into the neutral position where he felt like he was delivering an energy frequency, delivering molecules for the body to use as it sees fit. Now, this meant that he used to say that he was bringing a greater margin of safety to the already massively safe history of herbology, but that he wanted practitioners to have the tools where they could follow and adhere very, very closely to the law of Hippocrates, as was passed down by that great naturopathic master to all humanity, which was, in the care and healing of the human body, do no harm. And so he gave us also the bioenergetic principles that were becoming popular back in the 20th century that have carried on even further now in the 21st century. Doc used to say, health comes with the adjustment of the person's vibratory rate. Herbs and living nutriments carry resonant frequencies that can be imparted to the body. That's why he would often say, you know, the herbs are God's medicines. Today, science tells us that regarding genetic transcription of cellular metabolic processes, that this deep cellular process can have a direct, be impacted by thoughts and by feelings and by energies. And so for people who are sensitive to other people's energies, they can validate this, that sometimes they feel drained or sometimes they feel energized in the presence of someone. And so as we look at this exchange of energy and this reaction to energy frequencies, Doc wanted his formulas to be, you might even say, biomagnetically attuned to serving people in a very positive way. Doc Wheelwright said, the body does not have a deficiency of dangerous drugs. It has a deficiency of plant nutrients that it can use to maintain its cellular function. So today's science affirms that herbs are effective at the cellular metabolic level in all of our tissues. Now, this is the epigenetic and genetic level, and so herbs work deeply as allies in human health. Now, Dr. Shane Morris's work reveals the hand of his grandfather to assemble herbal nutritional combinetic formulas from both the bioenergetic perspective and the biochemical perspective. Whereas Doc said herbs are the true medicines for the human body, and nutrients, food nutrients, are the molecules that support the cellular processes toward optimal function. We find in his grandson, Dr. Shane Morris, the application of this information and this perspective founded directly on science and scientific research. So at Systemic, the past is alive with the founding principles of Doc Wheelwright, his bioenergetic research, but it's been further enlivened by Dr. Shane Morris's biology, cellular biochemistry, and epigenetic impact. So really, more than the legacy continues, Dr. Morris ensures that the legacy is actually enhanced with the light of scientific studies on the cellular metabolic processes and epigenetic responses. So this is where we say that Dr. Morris is bringing Doc Wheelwright's research into the 21st century. The legacy that Doc left, that he often talked about in the latter days of his life, that his formulas were a legacy that he wanted to leave for the maintenance and health of humanity, his gift to humanity. Dr. Morris steps into some very big shoes to fill and fills them wonderfully by bringing the bioenergetic and the cellular, herbolomic and herbolomic factors to bear that give us the very finest in nutritional supplementation. Systemic Formulas provides its bioenergetic and biochemical formulas and products to licensed health practitioners. For more information on the work that Dr. Morris is doing in Systemic Formulas, just call 1-800-445-4647. Thank you so much for this time to share with you the insights and inspiration of one of my great mentors, Doc Stuart Wheelwright, and how wonderful it is to be a clinical practitioner and get to watch the power of what herbal nutrition can do to support people in their most optimal health in the 21st century. Thank you so very much.